For the Houston Texans, I say they had a lot of problems because, well, they had a lot of stenches. Like, first, you had Bill O'Brien, their former head coach, causing a lot of problems as the general manager with these stupid trades, including DeAndre Hopkins, trade their top receiver away to the Arizona Cardinals. And then, of course, you had the very controversial sexual assault allegations from their former quarterback, Deshaun Watson, who, of course, didn't play in 2021. And then they got rid of the stench last offseason, last year. So they going into 2022, they finally got rid of the Deshaun Watson smell in the offseason. But I mean, they weren't fully clean of it themselves. But nonetheless, they could fully focus on determining whether or not their third round pick from 2021, Davis Mills, could be that long-term answer at quarterback. I mean, with Davis Mills, when I talked about him in my season recap from 2021, I mean, he was okay-ish, but I mean, it's clear he didn't have the supporting cast necessary to, to try to compete in whatever Texans team that they had. But then it was kind of more of the same this year, at least when talking about 2022, obviously. You had the lack of talent around him, and then he wasn't particularly that great as well. So the season not only went as expected for Houston, it also ended with the twist as well. So, they were in position to go for the number 1 overall pick by that point, by the end of the season. But then, of course, guess what happened? Their now former head coach, Lovie Smith, stuck it to the McNair's asses and had his team win the game. Because guess what? He knew he was going to get fired after week 18. So he's like, fuck you, bitches. I'm going to stick it to you and win this game. And nope, no number 1 overall pick for you, bitch. So, yeah, they basically took away the first overall pick from the Houston Texans. But, I mean, in the end of the day, it really didn't matter in this grand scheme of things. But before then, it didn't really, it had them worried for a second because it nearly derailed their offseason plan. So before we even get to that point, you had to figure out who was going to be your next head coach for the Houston Texans. And they managed to find that in perhaps their big key offseason event that happened. And that was the hiring of 49ers defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans as their new head coach. Now for DeMeco Ryans, he's had various ties to that organization, both as a player and now as a head coach. But as I stated back then when I did my season recaps, as much as I didn't agree with the move, I think he can reset the culture over there if he's given ample time to help rebuild the roster and the culture. Yeah, if he's getting that time, then maybe he can rebuild Houston to a somewhat respectable organization again. Just as long as the McNairs don't get in the way. Hopefully. So anyway, looking at back at my offseason priorities for the Houston Texans, they basically needed everything. They needed everything to prioritize. They needed 2 top receivers and a tight end. They needed some help for tackle Laramie Tunsil because that was one of their only bright spots in the offense. The offensive line was, he was okay, but it's clear it was still a major flaw. So he needed a lot of help. And then the defense seriously needed a lot of help too. They needed another starting corner opposite Derek Stingley Jr. because I thought Stingley Jr. had a pretty solid year. They also needed a linebacker and help for Jerry Hughes, Jonathan Greenard, Malik Collins on the pass rush. So they need a lot of everything in the offseason. So, yeah, it was a lot of deciding for the Houston Texans. Speaking of deciding, they also had to decide if they wanted to stick with Davis Mills or use the second overall pick to go and get a quarterback. So that was a lot of key decisions in DeMeco Ryans' first year as head coach for the Texans. So looking at some of their free agent moves first, honestly, they didn't lose a lot, which is always a good thing because for the Texans, they're pretty much finally beginning that rebuild. They basically only lost one of their key players, Ogbonia Okwankwo. He went to the Cleveland Browns in free agency, so not really much of a big loss considering what they did later. Looking at some of their free agent additions, perhaps the biggest one for their secondary was stealing away Jimmy Ward from the 49ers. So once DeMeco Ryans went to the 49ers, went to the Texans, so did Jimmy Ward. I think he's going to be a big get in terms of leadership and a mental and emotional support for that young defense. They also got some more help from the 49ers, Hassan Ridgeway, so 2 free agents coming over to Houston, and some offensive firepower. Receiver Robert Woods from the Titans, he didn't really pan out in Tennessee. And a little bit of a surprising one here, Dalton Schultz from the Dallas Cowboys. He took a 1-year prove-it deal because the Titan market free agency was but nonetheless, that quarterback was going to get a solid tight end option that was pivotal for Dak in his time there. And he also got a couple more options here. Corner Shaq Griffin from the Jaguars, so some solid help there. And for some insurance, Case Keenum from the Buffalo Bills. So, overall their free agency additions were pretty okay. But of course, the draft was going to be the most important question. What were they going to do here? Were they going to stick with Davis Mills or actually use the 2nd overall pick to go and get their next long-term quarterback? And guess what they did? They went out and got their quarterback after, screwing up in the last game of the regular season, thanks to Lovie Smith's F you. So, yeah, they didn't have to worry about what the Carolina Panthers did at number 1 because they got their guy because they went to get the next man up. And that next man up ended up being quarterback CJ Stroud from Ohio State. I'll have my thoughts on CJ Stroud in just a bit, but this is the guy that they needed. They needed a long-term answer at quarterback, and yeah, we'll see how he pans out. But it was the move that they had to make. And then right after, they immediately went back in on the very next pick to go get their guy on defense. Edge rusher Will Anderson Jr. From Alabama. And I was very high on Will Anderson in my scouting, in air quotes, when I did that episode. So this was a good move for the Texans. Sure, some people are a little bit weary of him, but, with time, I think he could be a good starter for them. They also got a couple more starters on the defense. Not starters, rotational pieces for that Houston Texans defense, and some linebackers, Dylan Horton from TCU and Henry Toto, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, from Alabama. And they got some center, Jared Patterson from Notre Dame. So this was a really good draft from the Texans. That's just my opinion, of course. And that's probably one of my biggest takeaways from the Houston Texans this offseason. Hitting their home run shot in the NFL draft, and they ran with it. They definitely ran with it. So I got to give Nick Caserio some props because we'll have to wait and see how these draft picks pan out, both in preseason and in the actual season itself. So he got the guy he wanted in CJ Stroud, and then he made a power play to make a trade with the Arizona Cardinals in the next pick to go and get the defensive player that he wanted, Will Anderson. So, yeah, these 2 guys are going to be pivotal, the 2 franchise cornerstones for the next couple of years for Houston. And then he made some more strong picks the rest of the way to help out his new QB, whether it is on the offensive line with Jared Patterson or a late-round receiver with Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State. The jury's still out on this draft class, obviously. But I think, on paper at least, it's a strong haul needed for DeMeco Ryans, as it's his first head coaching gig. And then the free agency pickups were, it was again solid, but I think it was more so of providing a veteran presence because this Texans roster is pretty young. So if it was going to be too young, then how are people going to learn? Are they going to be mature? So I think it certainly helped that Houston picked up some veteran names to give them some guidance in what I think is going to be a baby steps season in their first year of a rebuild. So looking at some of their key games of 2023, I think it's going to be the first game against the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore. Going up against a potentially high-powered offense that could also suffer some from growing pains as well as they try to adjust with Odell Beckham, Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, all at the same time with Lamar Jackson. But you never know. The Houston Texans might pull some magic hat trick out of their ass in that game and try to pull it close with them, or it could be the same old Texans that could also suffer from growing pains. And then you have your home opener against the Indianapolis Colts, who will also be trotting out a quarterback, so a new rookie quarterback. And then you go to Jacksonville to take on the all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence. So a couple early division games. And then week 8, you travel to Carolina to take on the Panthers to take on the first overall pick, Bryce Young. And then you go to Tennessee late in the season to take on the Tennessee Titans. And who knows if Ryan Tannehill or whoever's behind him will be starting that quarterback. But anyway, some interesting things for this Texans team this season. But your goal for this season, if you're the Texans, should be hoping for at least a good year, a good first impression for CJ Stroud. And that's probably one of my biggest questions for the Texans this season. How will both CJ Stroud and Will Anderson perform in their first year? I think, obviously, Stroud's going to clearly have his rookie struggles, just like every rookie quarterback does. But, that's to be expected. But what I like with CJ Stroud, he has strong ball placement. He's smart with the football. He has a lot of good escapability in the pocket. So, just like with every rookie quarterback in the NFL, they're raw. So, meanwhile, for Will Anderson, I think he's NFL. He's somewhat ready to start. He has strong skills of speed. He has a lot of skills with block shedding. So, of course, it'll both depend on how well their individual strengths translate to the NFL. So, but again, both of them are going to have their struggles in their first year, but they're also going to have their flashes as well. So we'll see how it translates. So, even in an all-around rebuilding AFC South, the Texans, they're not expected to compete for a playoff spot. I don't expect that at all. I do think that they could still serve as a couple trap games if, competing teams aren't careful enough. So expect this season to be more of an evaluation one to see how the young players do and, who's the best one to keep around in 2024 for CJ Stroud. So I expect the Texans to go somewhere around 5-12. And D'Amico Ryan's first year as coach. And yeah, we'll see how this first year for both D'Amico Ryan's, CJ Stroud, and all the other young players down in Houston. Let's see how they fare.